Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to Malibu.
Yeah.
Who's first time here on campus? Yeah. As someone who grew up in New Jersey, I just have to let you know, this is all real. It took me about 3 months to walk around and just touch things to make sure that this view and everything is not a Hollywood soundstage. It actually does look like this. It is so great to see you here. Again, I'm Pete Peterson, Dean here of the Graduate Policy School. And if I were to title my remarks here as an introduction, it would essentially be why here and why now. The why here part is the fact that this cross-sector work, the work that many of you are doing, the work that some of you are doing and don't even know that you're doing it, is really at the heart of who I want us to be as a graduate policy school. For anyone who's familiar with this discipline of graduate policy education, you probably know that these are usually pretty boring places that tend oftentimes to be seen as places that are preparing people for careers to head up the DMV in Fresno. And there's nothing wrong with that position. I just want to put that on the table. But my vision for us as a policy school and for how we prepare public leaders more broadly is that the way that we're going to solve the public problems that befall us is through cross-sector collaborations. And as all of you know in this room, the different sectors have different cultures. And to do this effectively demands a certain set of skills. And so while our graduate program is very much about preparing leaders for the public square, where I see us going in the future is that we are preparing cross-sector leaders to solve our toughest problems. This has been at a time that I think we all realize that is seriously demanding of inspiration for what's possible in the public square. I have tried to stop looking at my Twitter feed, but if any of you are familiar with what's happening in our politics and policy today, this is about as depressing a time as I think we've experienced in the last half a century in this country. And if there's anything that gives me hope, it's the stories that you see, some of them in the case study guide that's in your pocket folders, but also knowing the stories of many of you and the work that you do, working across sectors, across divides, to solve what are often extremely complex public policy challenges. Now, the format for today is going to be cross-sector in nature. We're going to be moving back and forth between what we're calling sector perspectives. So throughout the day, if you look at your agendas for today, we are going to be profiling and asking different leaders from the different sectors to tell their story about cross-sector work and what it means to them. We will also be featuring panels of people leading on working on specific public policy areas. And we will also have a main keynote from Jonathan McBride, who's been doing this work and supporting this work, not only in the White House, but in his private sector work as well. Now, the why here part, Pepperdine is a policy school. We just had our 20th anniversary last year. So we step into our third decade as a graduate policy program. And as part of the many events that we were doing throughout last year to celebrate our second decade as a school, I look back at the founding documents for the program. The strategic memos, articles that were written at the founding of the School of Public Policy back in 1997 when we first opened our doors. And it just came back to me as I was looking back over those founding documents and quotations that there was a particular article in the LA Times, this is dated March 18th, 1997, in which the founding dean for the School of Public Policy, Dr. Jim Wilburn, was interviewed about the launch of this new public policy program overlooking the Malibu Cliffs. And I just wanted to read this one quotation from the LA Times piece. Dean Wilburn said, and I quote, "A renewal of public policy should recognize that all the intermediary institutions that thrive in the space between the central government in Washington and the daily concerns of each solitary individual, our nonprofit associations, our churches and synagogues and mosques, our families, and the private commercial sector of labor and business associations are equally critical as creators and implementers of public policy. That was 20 years ago. And I think it's something that's always made us unique as a graduate policy program, is that we are not a school of government, even though we send a lot of our alums into careers in the public sector. When we did a review of where our alums have gone over the last 5 years, we almost saw a third, and a third of our alums going into the government sector at all levels, nonprofit sector, and the private sector in some sort of policy-related position. And so in many ways, this launch today, which is really our coming out party, this project for cross-sector leadership here at the School of Public Policy, is just an institutional manifestation of work we've been doing since the school launched 2 decades ago. And it's being done at a time that I think we so desperately need it. As you'll see in the stories that you'll hear today, in the panels and in the keynotes, there is reason for hope. And as I was communicating the importance of this cross-sector work to some friends of mine in the local government world, I often use the term inspirational. These are inspirational stories. And I hope that for today, somebody was asking me earlier, Pete, what's your hope for today? Well, really my main hope is that people leave here inspired. Inspired about what's possible when people put the problem at the center that they're trying to solve and not all the other things that distract us from solving problems together. And again, I think we as a policy school are intent on not only hosting events like this is our inaugural conference on cross-sector leadership, which means there's going to have to be a second one. But also, we are going to increasingly be integrating this cross-sector leadership work into our Masters in Public Policy program. And so for those of you who it is actually your first time here on campus, as I said to a group of the Presidio Institute fellows who gathered here yesterday, I want you to get your fingerprints on this project for cross-sector leadership. I want you to take some ownership of it. So whether it's thinking through, are there internship opportunities that you want to extend to students, or do some of you want to teach here and teach this work around cross-sector leadership? Do some of you want to work together in creating certificate programs and educational programs around this cross-sector leadership work? My cell number is 310-924-2238. That really is my cell number. Because again, if we're going to do this cross-sector leadership work together, I want you to take ownership of it. And so the two things I really hope for today are, one, that I hope you leave here inspired at a time that desperately needs inspiration. And secondly, that you look for ways to intersect into this particular project that's here at a graduate policy institution. Because I believe this is the future of how we prepare public leaders. Are you in? Yeah. So I want to begin with our first sector perspective. As I said before, if you look at your agendas in the packets, we are going to be weaving in and out of panels and mini keynotes and also a main keynote. The mini keynotes are what we're calling sector perspectives, and throughout the day we are going to be bringing in up here a leader to speak from their perspectives, their sector's perspective on this cross-sector work. And I am so excited that to represent the public sector and government is Karen Baker. Karen currently serves as California's Chief Service Officer for Governor Edmund G. Brown Jr. She leads California Volunteers, the State Service Commission, charged with administering the nation's largest state AmeriCorps portfolio. In addition, California Volunteers serves as the lead agency for disaster volunteering and donations management, and promotes volunteering and service across California. Initially appointed by Governor Schwarzenegger in January of 2006, Karen was named the Secretary of Service and Volunteering and has forged vibrant public-private partnerships resulting in the creation of successful innovations, including the California Disaster Corps, Business Partners Program, and the California Volunteers Service Enterprise Initiative. Karen's 20-plus year career began with a year of service as a Jesuit Volunteer Corps member working with at-risk youth. Her solutions-based innovations have been fundamental to her work in settings ranging from federal and state government to local nonprofits, national nonprofits, and universities. And I have not seen Karen in at least a decade. I used to head up a bipartisan nonprofit that also launched in this very room called Common Sense California. Our tagline was, yes, there really is common sense in California. And the work of that nonprofit was finding ways for people to get more involved in the policy decisions that affect their everyday lives. And I was put by one of our board members at the time on the case of meeting Karen there in your Sacramento offices, and I couldn't be happier to see this circle close here. And so without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Karen.
Okay, I want to like book you now for my funeral. That was a lot. Well, good morning. Morning. Okay. I am just so thrilled to be here. I thought the best use of my time is to hopefully shed a little bit of light, provide a few examples of where I thought we got it right, and offer tips to those, especially those of you in the public sector. And how many of you are in the public sector? Da, da, da. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, then I'm going to spread it to everybody because I've got tips across the sectors. I used to lead a homeless agency here in LA called Chrysalis, where we founded a lot of great micro enterprises with the help of McKinsey, and did some just great private sector partnerships there. And I've had the great honor of working both in Washington, where I got to work with Lisa Spinelli, yay. And now I get to work with people on the ground that are doing great AmeriCorps programs, like Jarrett, who's in the house from American Red Cross, who's a great partner with our Safe Corps program, and all kinds of I think what has been really, really exciting work. So let me begin by just saying, in my experience working in government, I've been there now, I guess, 18, 19 years in government, both at the federal and state level, and both Republican and Democrat. What really matters when anyone's trying to crack the code on solving a problem in government, it's all about where's the money, where's the knowledge, and how do we build trust for the solution that we're proposing. And I think what's interesting is often, or not too often, government doesn't think about how they could work across sectors to build all of those three things in a collaborative way. And the main reason I see that doesn't happen isn't because there aren't great public servants that want to do that. It's that they lack the exposure to the nonprofit and the private sector. They may have just been grown, if you will, within the public sector, starting in one public sector job and getting the next one, and they keep climbing. And then they're up in a position where maybe they could tap those resources, and they may or may not have had kind of a cross-sector perspective in their own path, right? So that's one of the challenges. I also see in the public sector people not often recruiting outside the sector, right? They want someone who really gets and knows government. but they don't necessarily see how knowing the nonprofit or the private world would be necessarily relevant. So they know it's going to be potentially helpful down the line, but it's not like the core competence that they're looking for in the job description. The other big challenge that we have in government is there's this insane shortage of brokers, just by design. If you look at the governor's office, in Jerry Brown's office, there is a director of external affairs, Jamie Callahan, for those that know her. She's great, she's fabulous. One person is in charge of all external relationships with the state of California, you know? To say that she is amazing is an understatement. She's fabulous. Is she a little overwhelmed? I think so. And is she reactive or proactive, right? She's having to just deal every day with what's coming at her from so many different issues and from so many different, you know, interests. So how do we in our, just even in the way that we plan how government's going to work, are we thoughtful about inserting and ensuring that there's broker-like roles in our structure, you know? I was recently meeting with the mayor of Sacramento, Darrell Steinberg, and I was meeting with his team, and there was 9 people on his team in charge of making things happen in Sacramento. And of course, when you look at all the issues that they all need to cover and the neighborhoods they all have to cover, there wasn't any capability or easy ability to have someone have a truly cross-sector brokering role. They all just brought what relationships they had to the table. And because you don't have a whole lot of money often in city government when you're staffing your team, you might have one, you know, more, let's say, seasoned professional that would have a lot of relationships they're bringing to the table. But often you're getting those hungry 27-year-olds who will come in and do great work, work really hard. That's definitely the case. But they're not coming in with that perspective. You can't afford the ones that have that perspective, is the bottom line. It's just a price point reality, you know? So it's interesting because I was talking to Darrell about it. He's like, is there any way you come on board? And I'm like, you can't afford me. And it's not because I'm that expensive, but it's just that I'm just letting you know that I would love to help you do your work. I'll do it in the efforts that we're doing here from the governor's office that affect all mayors, and will include you in those groups. But I'm just letting you know that there's something just wrong with our whole assumption about cross-sector, because it's not built into the system of government. I think that's just one of my observations. Another observation is we haven't created doorways to engage the private sector and the nonprofit sector in any kind of meaningful way. And those doorways have to be very intentional. I know when I landed in my position as the Secretary of Service, the first thing I did is a statewide listening tour, where I went to 11 markets and brought 200 nonprofit leaders in each of these different various communities to just listen. I was there just to listen. And I can tell you that none of my colleagues on the cabinet did anything like that, in part because they were just jumping into work that was hitting them like a fire hose, right? So that's the other challenge, is what we expect of these government leaders with limited resources and not enough time or the luxury to listen is pretty extraordinary. And then we're shocked when they don't get it, right? But when have they had time to get it? When have we positioned that in their role? So if you are a government leader, one of the things I would suggest you do is definitely figure out how can you, in a very purposeful way, figure out how you're going to book those listening sessions. If you're a nonprofit leader, are you reaching out to the electeds? Are you reaching out to your private sector partners? You are for funds, but are you reaching out in other ways that will help shape how your issue is framed in your state, in your community? Because you're a huge influencer. One of the things that I often think is perhaps an inappropriate analogy, but I'll make it, is that I think of government kind of sees themselves as this manager of a very complicated family, where they're the parents, right? We have to make these decisions about money, about knowledge and how to build trust. And we've got grandparents, that's the nonprofit sector. The nonprofit sector are the grandparents because they've got the wisdom, they've got the trust. Sometimes, because of a lack of resources, they have to operate a little more slower than they'd like. If they're well funded, they can be that fast walking grandparent that you see in the neighborhood. But often that's where the wisdom resides and the trust that you want to build with your solution. They know what's really going on the ground, right? And then the private sector is often treated like the 20-year-old with a very nice trust fund, right? So the 20-year-old who's like, I'm going to be Impulsive. I'm Comcast NBC. I want to really make inroads with the state of California. I've got lots of zeros. How can I make an impact? I want to get in front of the governor. I want to get our brand on something so that when my legislation goes before the electeds, I want to make sure they know our brand. How can you give me a project, a something, and I'll give you the money. And I'm kind of impulsive, and I'm going to go with the right idea that I find that can align me with the right people. There's that kind of kid in the family. Then there's the more like small, mid-sized businesses. They don't have as many zeros. They don't have a trust fund, right? And they too want to contribute, but no one is really talking to them. They're like the youngest kid in the family to really draw out this analogy, right? And the grandparents are sometimes sent to the old folks' home. No one talks to the nonprofits. So what I see is government sitting there going, we must solve for, let's say, homelessness or a lack of affordable housing. And they don't bring people together to figure out the solution. I was recently just a few days ago with Deloitte in a meeting in Sonoma with all business leaders and a couple of city officials trying to figure out how are they going to rebuild their community. How the heck are they going to do this? I only had an hour to pop in. I'm the annoying person that always comes late, always leaves early, just so you know. And I come into this session, and I was telling Jamie and Lisa this story last night, and what ends up happening is this complete block based on how people don't know how to talk across sector. They were talking about the need to build affordable units in downtown Santa Rosa. They had both a midterm and long-term penciling out of the numbers that proved that it would make financial fiscal sense to do so. The short-term numbers didn't look good, or there was a fear on behalf of the financial institutions to really go out there and give them the dollars to do it. The city of Santa Rosa guy was absolutely frustrated because he had both developers, land, he had all kinds of project ideas. He had 20 ideas. Oh my God, he has so many ideas. And the banker is sitting there with his hands crossed across his chest going, I don't see it happening, right? And then there's the Chamber of Commerce there, and just wanting to make it happen, but not sure how to do this. So I turned to the banker and I just asked a simple question. What would it take for you to put money against a project in downtown Santa Rosa? Would it take like one test project? He goes, yeah. You give me one project that goes right and well, and then other money will follow. And I go, okay, City of Santa Rosa, do you have one test project? No, I've got 20. Okay, calm down, young man. I want you to give me the best one. And why don't you ask the banker right here, right now, what are the qualities that he needs to see in order to make it pencil out? Does he want low-income housing? Does he want high-end housing? What does he need in order to sell it so he can get more money? Remember, I don't know jack about finance, right? I don't know anything. But I know that you've got to know what the private sector wants and needs in order to get the loan moving forward, or so I think. This is what my assumption is. So they have a little conversation, and then I said, by the way, then I enter the important element of competition, which is really important thing to remember about putting together deals with the private sector. They're always competing. I then drop in a little sentence. I happen to know some people head of the CRA funds at Bank of America. a couple of other people that might be of help. Suddenly, local banker man goes, well, you know, I think we want to invest in our own community. I go, well, then it sounds like what we need to have is a breakfast where we could bring the bankers together of the community with the city of Santa Rosa with the idea, and then all of a sudden, Chamber of Commerce man stands up and goes, I'll host the breakfast, right? I'll host the breakfast. He puts together the breakfast. They're gonna have the breakfast to talk about the idea to get it done. And they'll have their model project, and then they'll be able to move forward. And it took the public, the private, and the nonprofit sector to make that all happen. But what it really took is someone who doesn't know much at all about housing or finance, a cross-sector leader like you, and I'm one of you, sitting there going, well, it just seems to me that you need to know what your private sector bottom line is, and you need to understand what this public sector needs, and you need to know, and that's how the deal came together. Another very quick story to end has to do on the climate side. We have 129 million trees that have died because of bark beetle and drought. I'm in a meeting with the Drought Task Force. It's a very popular thing to do in government. You'll have these grand task forces, which are very grand. And we're sitting there at a meeting, and we're hearing from homeowners who are saying that because of the dying trees, and they were living in Tulare County, their insurance companies were dropping them because the cost of cutting down a dying tree costs about $1,000 a tree. And they were low to middle income households that didn't have the money, and yet they were responsible for their perimeter being safe and being without trees like falling on them, right? So what was government going to do about it, right? So they're like, you know, well, we don't know how we'll tackle this. It was one of those typical challenges. So I whisper next to Bruce Sato, who heads up the California Conservation Corps next to me. I said, you know, I got a couple $1 million of AmeriCorps resources that we can call a governor's initiative. It's flexible money. You set up tent camps of CCC members that can go from community to community in the Central Valley, cut down these trees, bada bing, bada boom. It's like, how are we gonna identify the priority trees? Because there's these fire safe councils, that's their total purpose, is to do that. They know the homeowners, they're the nonprofit with the trust at the local level, within the community, with the homeowners, they'll identify the trees. So we put together this public-private partnership, and that thing was up and out the door within 3 months. That doesn't happen in government. You don't move that fast, typically, you know, but you move that fast when there's a dire need, and when you can look around the room and say, who can do what, right? And then PG&E got involved because we found that there were certain trees that had a diameter that was larger than what the CCC was legally allowed to cut down. So PG&E was great, and they're like, we'll cut down those extra trees if you can help us take the limbs off these other trees that we're clearing in fire road areas under a contract. We're like, done and done. So it's like being flexible, and it's about putting the deals together. And it's really just understanding that if we can all work together and really focus on the problem and figure out what we all need to get out of the deal, we can make really big and exciting things happen. So I just leave you with those stories, hopefully to inspire you to go out and do the same. I know you already are. And thank you for this opportunity. I can take any questions for a few minutes, I think, but I'm not sure. Yeah, any questions? Yeah.
Tyrone Roderick Williams, Sacramento Promise Zone.
Hello, how are you?
I'm well. Could you just talk about the AmeriCorps program?
Sure.
And at the federal level, some issues regarding continuing the funding and continuing to value the volunteers and the people who are part of the program.
Sure. It's been a really interesting kind of political game that's gone on. What's great to know about AmeriCorps is it started during President Bill Clinton's administration, but actually inspired by President Bush, who did some really important groundwork there, and it's been truly a bipartisan, embraced strategy for how to put boots on the ground of everyday citizens who can work full-time, half-time, quarter-time to help their community for a year-long commitment and get paid a stipend, which is why we call them members instead of volunteers. And at the end of the year, it gets close to $6,000 to pay back student loans or to pay for future education. You can be 17, you can be 100, and anything in between. Although in California, 75% of our people are between 17 and 25, typically. So this program has gone through different political administrations, has had different realities, where sometimes it's been the target, you know, is this money that's being responsibly spent? Are the AmeriCorps members, you know, out there registering people to vote, which of course they're not, and they're not allowed to do. So there was some early issues in the early years that questioned kind of really the purpose. And it wasn't really national service, just like military service is national service. Is it something that could be kind of comparable? Luckily, because of unbelievable strength and support from Republican members, even though the president, OMB, had recommended zero funding, we were able to actually get a budget increase during these times, which is pretty extraordinary. I personally believe that President Trump just hasn't had it explained to him yet. I know the head of OMB is someone who doesn't support it as a cost-effective measure. But if you talk to senators and members of Congress and anyone in community, they're like, this is, you know, a triple win. You know, you get a young person that gets civically engaged. They're having amazing impacts. You know, they go on to pay for college, which is a whole nother challenge we're faced with. You know, this is fabulous. And our corporations and public and nonprofit agencies are like, give me this talent pipeline. Give me people that know how to work with people, that have these soft skills. So we have this huge desire for these AmeriCorps alumni and Peace Corps alumni that have done this kind of service experience. I'm glad you asked that, and that was not a plant. That was great.
Karen, probably just one more.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm really curious about the listening tour you did.
Sure.
With the 200 at a time group.
Yeah.
How did you structure that? What were those like, and what was the follow-up afterward?
Yeah, lousy follow-up, I'll start with that. But to start it, what I just did is and this is a really important partner in any time you want to really connect with a nonprofit, you connect with the philanthropic community. I basically would go to foundations in a given area and basically say, who do I need to have in the room? That would be a first stop. I would talk to a mayor's office. Who are your key nonprofit partners? I'd talk to the interfaith councils. You know, the faith-based community is so active, and AmeriCorps has just been opened up to be able to be a resource that can be given to faith-based strategies. So that's a growing, you know, sector. So we would literally just, it was a referral thing, and just getting that list. They would show up, but what was most fascinating, I think, when we had the meetings is I would ask a question like, how many of you know 25% of the people in the room, 50% of the people in the room, 75% of the people in the room? Most people knew 25% or fewer. They did not know their own community. Because, and having run a nonprofit, I didn't ever have time to go down and meet other people in the homeless space as much as I wanted to. I was just so busy just trying to meet our client need, raise money. Like, it just felt like that was felt like a luxury. So those meetings were actually really important for the community, that they got together as a community of nonprofits. That's a sector, in my mind, unlike the Chamber of Commerce, that does organize their private sector by industry groups. There's no one organizing the nonprofit sector by industry groups in any kind of measured way. I thought I could go in and go, okay, well, where are all the tutoring nonprofits? And that someone could hand me a list, and there isn't such a thing, you know, or all the homeless agencies, or all the free health clinics. And I found it's very unorganized. As far as the follow-up, other than sending them notes, which we definitely did that, there was no longer dollars available. It was right after sequestration and my travel budget got cut, and